Hi again. We're here with Dave Davies. Welcome, Dave. Principal SEO Manager at CoreWeave.
Indeed. How's it going, Jason?
It's going brilliantly. We're having a great conference. Everything's going well. And you're going to be talking to us about the look back window to figure out who our clients are in a world where we don't have any visibility, or we don't have very much visibility in AI, assistive engines, and agents.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge that I think all people are facing, and some of what I'll be talking about is traditional sort of like marketing, but just different ways of sort of looking at things as a marketer. In other ways, yeah, it's a brand new world as you've touched on, and as like many of the speakers have also touched on, is who we're marketing to, how we're tracking all of this stuff is just fundamentally different than it used to be. So yeah, what I'm going to be chatting about first is how we might want to start thinking about and communicating look back windows, which is, I know, a really, really funny topic for marketers, but that's what I'll be sort of touching on here in this session and then tomorrow, including how we deal with agents. And then on top of that, tomorrow morning, we'll be chatting about agents specifically as the user, as opposed to the human.
Which I'm going to really love. The agents as a user is something I'm really looking forward to, which is not to say I'm not looking forward to looking back in time, which is ironic because we're kind of living in the future right now, but you're telling me to look back in time. So please go ahead, give us the presentation.
Sure, and I've just put together a few slides because I think it'll illustrate well, because I was like, you know what, I can't pull up like our actual dashboards and go, hey, here's our metrics, because, well, very clearly that's not something that I could or would want to do. But I wanted to come up with a visual way that people could sort of understand what I'm talking about here. So I'll sort of frame things in the context that I have them in, so that users can take that, or listeners can take that and sort of cascade that forward into their own application. So you had mentioned that I'm the Principal SEO Manager at CoreWeave. Part of that is weights and biases. And in fact, anybody who's heard me speak, you and I chatted frequently, and including on your show, would have heard me under weights and biases. Weights and biases was acquired by CoreWeave. So it's just sort of, that stitching together. So what I'm looking at here, or talking about here, is more the product-led growth series, then moving into the enterprise motion, right? So we have two distinct motions, and actually that breaks up into three distinct motions that we have to work in here. We have a great revenue marketing team, data science teams, which is great. That's something I know not everybody has at their disposal to slice and dice the data. So what I'm going to be sort of talking about here is how I was looking when I first started with weights and biases. It was mostly a product-led growth engine. They just done their Series B funding. It was a smaller startup at the time. And then moving into sort of the enterprise, more evolved motions with revenue and things like that. So what we had before, and traditionally we would be thinking of, is, hey, top of the funnel stuff. That's our sort of product-led growth motion, and then it just sort of moves down the funnel until they are willing to sign that check for you, right? And moving into the enterprise motion. That was the wrong way for us to look at. It was great at the time, fine at the time. And in fact, it's how most of us, and I would suspect most of the people sort of watching right now, probably approach it. You have your top of funnel, and then you move things down. I get it. It makes sense. But in fact, I do it. And in some applications, I still do it, because sometimes that's just how you look at things. But I would argue, and the case I'm going to make is, there actually should be multiple look back windows that we're looking at here. So we have basically two formal look back windows and one sort of like fuzzy middle look back window. And that's not to say you can't focus on one individual look back window for a specific task. But again, historically as a marketer, I've generally looked at things from the top of the funnel all the way down. We all looking with one look back window, if you even know like to think about things as far as a look back window. And now in this scenario, what we found as things were evolving is I needed to be looking at two formal look back windows, and then a few different look back windows, and sort of a fuzzy middle. But we're going to get into what this fuzzy middle, and I don't mean like fuzzy like you can't understand it, just like there is this sort of like nebulous part in the middle that all of us will have. I only outline what my application was here for users to understand how this might apply to them, right? So as you're watching, you can apply this to, you may not have product-led growth, for example. You may, but you may not, but there will be these preliminary touch points that happen between you and your customers during their journey, and needing to think about these in two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So in our end, what we have is the sort of two worlds scenario, right? There's the product-led growth motion where we have like rapid cycles, so generally self-service signups. Sometimes there's a little bit of hand holding, but generally self-service signups, right? This is where we have like hackathons, stuff like that to bring people into that version of the pipeline. Then our enterprise motion, completely different, right? Like these are content. These are where we're, and all of us, well, most of us will have this sort of like layer in there where you have your sort of free product-led growth sort of users. They onboard by themselves. It may be e-commerce, and this is just sort of, the ones that just pop in and they're like, I'm just looking for shampoo, and then they just buy shampoo, and Instacart shows up at your door with it, whatever they may be. And then there'll be the sales motions that involve volume or bigger ticket items, vehicles, whatever that might be, that are moving into a more high touch point. To treat these the same and to say the same channel, the same landing pages, are doing the same job. We're trying to aggregate all of this into one bundle, sort of wrecks what works in each path. But more importantly, and why I really have to focus in on this, and why I thought it was worth discussing in this session, is if we just imagine for a second, we have a company, a few of their users have started using product X, Y, or Z. In our case, it'll be observability systems or something. A couple people came from academia, or a couple people were just like using their own agents and finding weights and biases and installing it, and now they're using it. You have a couple people in that motion. Understanding how they got there is important, but for a customer, like in the higher touch enterprise motions that many of us have, you have a much longer time frame that people are dealing with. So let's say I have a look back window of 30 days. A lot of us would have a default look back window to 30 days. So just to make sure people understand that, what that means is when I'm saying what channel was responsible for this conversion, it's how many days do I look back and go, the first thing they did inside that look back window. They may have done 5 things, but it's first touch attribution, for example. What's the first thing they did inside of this look back window? If I have a 30-day window, and I'm looking at my enterprise motions, for example, and I just had a 30-day look back window, it's probably because the cycle for a lot of these sales is so long, many, many months, I'm going to completely miss what caused those users to actually start using our product, because it's going to be outside that window. Right. And how far back do you want to go to sort of see that? Right. Like if I opened up my window to 2 years, I might catch the PLG sort of motions in that, but I'm going to have no idea what actually started to move the needle on the enterprise motion. So in our scenario, we have 2 different dashboards. Well, they're very similar dashboards to be honest, but 2 different and sort of look back focuses here. So obviously I can't show our dashboard with our actual data. So I've just sort of gone, hey, here's sort of like how we look at it. So this is what would be referred to as the top down. So you want to think of this as what's the first thing you're trying to get users to do when they get your site. In our case, it's product-led growth, right? You would view this completely different. It might just be sign up for a newsletter. It might be somehow engage with a free trial, right? Which would be much more akin to our sort of product-led growth motion. It may be just whatever it is that you're trying to get that user to do to get their email, get them engaged, that sort of thing. So here we have our look back window, and this is based on the sign up. So when did the user first engage with our product, right? So this is a completely different motion, and we have our filterable, the typical usual suspect channels. I can look by time, and that I just mean like, over the last year, what's my numbers, channel, landing page. But what you can see actually, if you look at the table, is how many attribution points are we assigning, right? How many signups, product-led signups did that turn into? In our case, you would see it as first runs or calls. In our case, that's product use, right? Like this is what it's called. You do a run, right? That's actually using our tool to monitor the traces from your LLM, whatever that might be, right? And then you're going into the marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, and then into money, right? But remembering, of course, that right now, all I'm doing is going from the day they did the sign up. Let's look back. And in our case, we did a lot of experimenting. And recently we've switched from a 90-day look back to 180 days. So we're willing to go 180 days, half a year back in time and go, what's the first thing they did? Because that's how we're going to deal with this attribution. And there was a lot of research and looking into that went, actually, this makes sense for us. So to look at their channels, it might be 90 days. For you, 30 days to me in most scenarios would be way, way, way too small. Now, where that gets interesting, right? I mean, right now you can go, this actually looks pretty similar to exactly what we're all doing right now, right? And this one actually does. This is exactly how typically we do it. We're using 180-day look back window. You might be using 30. You might not know what your look back window is. You're just going, I don't know, GA4 gives me some numbers. You can change that. Sort of how that attribution works. We don't use GA4 too much, but right now we're looking just at that path, right? So now we get into dashboard 2. We have a lead acquisition. That looks really familiar, right? This is basically the exact same dashboard, but here you'll notice in the first one, I refer to it as top down. So top of funnel, working our way down. Here's our signups. One of the interesting things is if I could show you the ARR numbers, so the annual revenue being generated from this, they're actually quite low on that dashboard 1. And that's actually the point. And that's because in a 6-month window, from the first touch of an account, the money being generated from them is pretty low because that cycle takes so long. Now on the bottoms up, we've gone from the point where the user became an opportunity at our sales level, right? Like when they become a qualified opportunity at the sales level. Now we're going to look 180 days back from that point in time and decide what those users are doing. This is a fundamentally different thing, right? Because those users that came in on the sign up may use our product for a couple of years. We need to know who they are, but they now go into this bucket we call product-led growth. And that's that nebulous sort of like blob that travels down our funnel. And then we look, once they become a qualified opportunity, we can now look 180 days and go, okay, but what's that thing that tipped them over, right? Like, what's the feature that we added? What's the what is it about the account? What is it about the use case that they're working on, right? That sort of thing. We can now look back a little bit differently and sort of treat these different. So what this gives us and why I suggest adjusting these look back windows and playing with them is critically important. Like really think about what is it you're getting in front of people and how long is that sales cycle. Also understanding that you have 2 or more key points in time that you should be doing your look back windows from. And in our case, and probably a lot of different cases, we also now we've looked our first look back window, brings them into the product. Now we have a different look back window that's at the opportunity level, right? Like this is critical point. This is where they're like, how do they give you money? And then we have this sort of like nebulous blob in the middle called product-led growth, right? That just sort of like travels down and people are using our product, which now we can identify and pull out and go, okay, what are the levers that we can put in there? What are people engaged with? What are their use cases to try and enhance those product-led growth to sort of, I guess, optimize them more to the features and use cases that we're finding work better down funnel. So you can sort of see this through here, right? You have your visitor to lead, then your MQL. So MQL, for people who don't know these acronyms, marketing qualified lead, to sales qualified lead, right? Is sort of like moving people further down the pipeline there. And I'm just going to speed up a little bit here just to make sure we have time. If there's any questions here. But where the revenue is won and lost on my case, and it's different for each people, is towards the middle of the funnel. So that's that nebulous piece in the middle, which interestingly doesn't have the look back windows that we've been talking about here. But what it does have is now that we can put it in isolation and go, okay, we have like different users at the enterprise level. We have different users at the product level. Now we can understand what those engineers, because it's typically engineers or software engineers or people who are just like vibe coding, right, sitting in this middle blob. And now we've isolated them to go, okay, they're in our middle of the funnel because we need to increase their use so that their boss will then be able to sort of justify the expenses of paying us for the use of the product. So A couple of things that, and you can sort of see it here, and this is how I sort of suggest people look at it. I tend to go with first touch. There's a real case for last touch, and you can go back and forth. Like there are times where I jump into last touch, there's times where I go to first touch. But when we're going earlier in the funnel, I often tend to look at the first touch, which is how I have it looked that way. So in getting people into the product, what's the first thing they did? Sometimes you could go last touch. What's the last thing they did before signing up for your newsletter, right? Purchasing that product, that sort of thing can be important. But that awareness stage is why I put first touch here. Then you've got your linear and position based. That I tend to use more in these middle. How do I sort of cultivate the user as we go across? And then the last touch. You could use first touch or last touch in the screens I was showing. I was using sort of like first touch, but with a 180-day look back window on an account to sort of see, what their sort of trigger was to actually turn into something that became a real opportunity for our sales team. But last touch is also important. Was it a white paper, right? And going in and understanding what's that closing trigger. So understanding the different linear and position based in that middle is also critically important. And for those, and I mentioned this because that's where we deal with our cultivation that I was talking about in this nebulous zone. Also, this is where you get the sort of like branding, right? I mean, if I wasn't including the linear and position based, everybody who does any social media would be like, I hate you, Dave, because you're not including the very valuable work we do. And I would be excluding them because they don't tend to be first and last touch unless you're running an event or something like that. So, which Jason, I know you'll be well acquainted with because I've seen you getting a lot of traction on social, sort of talking about this event specifically. So, you know what, I'll sort of skip on for now and just sort of like exit. I want to leave room for some discussion if we wanted to have any. So I will leave it at that.
Brilliant. So the idea of being able to isolate different aspects, because we don't have visibility, because it's opaque. Andrea Volpini was talking about the same thing, is remove all of the as much of the noise as possible and look at what we can actually see. Is that fair? And how do you go about it?
Oh, sorry, you actually cut out for a second. So that was funny. I couldn't see you. You were like a black screen on my end, and I was sort of like waiting. I could see the recording, so I missed the question.
Oh, right. So I was saying that Andrea Volpini talks about you putting UTM tags on as much as possible to reduce the direct bucket to the very, very minimum so that you can then extrapolate and figure out who was there. So it's a question of, if we can't see the granular detail, remove as much as we can and then minimize the noise that we can.
Yeah, I mean, it hits, like, to put it in the scenario we have that problem a lot more on the product-led growth side than we do on the sort of enterprise motion side. And it makes sense. And I'm sure Andrea, like, I sort of know a little bit about his marketing because I see it out there because I'm sort of one of his targets. So I see what he does. And in the product-led growth side, that's where, like, in our case, we get those pesky LLMs recommending us, right? Or we get somebody just sitting in like Claude code, and it's like, hey, let's put, WANDB in this code for you. And it's like, okay, the attribution there is exactly what he's sort of talking about. Like, let's filter out as much as we can from UTMs, but sometimes you just can't. But exactly what he's saying, let's sort of clear up as much of the unknown as we can. When we hit our sort of enterprise side motions, it gets a lot easier, right? Because those are much more, as I'm sure they are with most people who are dealing with the higher ticket, right? Like, when I'm looking at a car, that person knows a lot more detail and can do some very specific marketing to me, and they understand those channels that they're using, rather than when I'm sitting on, like, just Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and sort of like looking at those metrics. So I totally agree with him. I think we're heading into a world that gets worse and worse for that.
Yes.
In fact, tomorrow I'll actually be illustrating one of those scenarios where even what he's saying, 100% right, but it's about to get even worse, and we're about to lose data that we currently have because those UTMs start to break. An example that I will give to sort of like tease people coming in is, we know that they're starting to put ads. We know that agents baked in, I'm just going to refer to the agents baked into ChatGPT or Gemini or Chrome, right? That these agents can start acting on our behalf. So what if I run that paid ad campaign driving people to a white paper, but it's now an agent that's engaged with it, dropped all the UTM parameters because it's not paying attention to UTM parameters. It's just heading into that page and then popping over, filling out the form, and it's done. And now the users never left ChatGPT. They've just got the white paper for you. You now have their information. You just don't have the attribution for it.
Right.
So
brilliant. So that's for the next session. But coming back to the attribution, you were saying that you focus on first touch. And then there's this whole argument about first touch, last touch, equal value to each of the touches, or weighted value depending on your model. How do you figure that out depending on the business? Because you're obviously in the AI agential buying business. I'm in the high ticket service provider to entrepreneurs who are looking after their personal brand. What makes that decision sensible?
Yeah, I mean, to me, a lot of that ends up coming into which channel or content type, like not necessarily channel, but like which combination of channel and content type am I actually talking about? So I'll use me as an example here, because or a specific scenario related specifically to the work that I do, which is I have authors. They're machine learning engineers. They write under my direction specific things. When it comes to how they surface on Google Organic or on agents and the attribution model, there I tend to look at first touch. This is an awareness play. I'm trying to get in front of people who don't know I exist. So at the end of the day, though, what's most important to me in that way, so purpose is getting in front of people that don't know I exist, or people who are switching use cases, right? They've been using computer vision, but now they're going into robotics a little bit. So they're trying to bridge that gap between computer vision and so trying to grab them there. And help them with that understanding. But at the end of the day, I think a big part is what's the purpose? Like, what am I trying to do? So if it's awareness, top of funnel or first touch, if it's I'm trying to close the deal, last touch, right? Like what white paper did I put in front of them that made them do this thing? Or what ad did I put in front of them that finally made them trigger? What event did I pull them into? Where Jason could like look super smart, and now that user just wants to give you some money, right? Like what is sort of like that stage. And at the end of the day, I look really heavily at what's the cost per desired action, right? And going like when I'm talking about my authors, yes, I look at first touch. I also look at last touch, and then I look further down the funnel and go, what's the ARR contribution of this user at first and last? Because that's their goal. And if I can come back and go, my authors cost us, I'm just going to absolutely make up ridiculous numbers now, right? Like $10,000 a year. I'm only picking that because it's like just an easy, nobody would have any cost, right? Okay, our authors cost us $10,000 a year. Hey, they made us $15,000, right? Like I can look at that in the ARR. When I'm going next year to go, hey, is this a good use of our money? They generate more than they cost. So any extra byproduct is helpful. So any product-led growth might get lost in some of that ARR, as I was talking about on the slides, where it's like, I'm only looking at a 6-month look back window on that sign up. And most people aren't signing up 6 months after their first sign up, or aren't signing up like with our product, giving us money on an enterprise scale within 6 months of first using our product. Most don't. Like that's just how this works. So it actually is sort of like undervaluing them, but intentionally, right? Because I'm just looking at that one and going, even in the worst scenario, like they've generated more than they cost. Like even in the worst scenario that I can frame them in. So, so part of that is just the framing that you're putting on it.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at this. I've been talking about the switch from micro to macro. I come from an economics background, microeconomics versus macroeconomics. Very, very similar approach. It's saying you can't see the details. You have to create a methodology that makes sense for you and then apply it and use like with like comparison over time.
Well, exactly. And a big important piece to me, and like to all of it, I shouldn't say for me, for you, for everybody, is understanding that everybody in your company understands the pros and cons of whatever look back window you pick, whatever breakdown of channels, whatever breakdown of content types, that everybody understands the pros and cons and is using the exact same word to mean the exact same thing, right? Which is often difficult, like when I'm working at different conversations, different parts of the company, and it's like, what, like right now, like I think I mentioned at the beginning, right? Like we merged out on weights and biases with, we were required by CoreWeave, right? So now we've got two different marketing teams using often very similar words right? And so just like learning, and I am learning, but it's like we're using the same word for slightly different things, right? And so just making sure that there's a unified understanding, and that I go, when I say we have a 180-day look back window, understanding what the pros and cons are of that, because I might miss some stuff actually that was really, really important in the last couple months. That was critical because I'm looking back too far. And it was just like, well, they popped in, and then it was like 4 months later that they did their next thing, right? When I really look at the user level and go, I caught like a misfire over here. They happened to visit our site here. And then it was like 4 months. And then all of a sudden they became really heavy. It was actually that thing that did it. It's not this thing like 6 months ago. So you're going to miss some of that, but you play around with it enough and create like, scatter plots and stuff like that. Sort of go like, which is sort of how I was looking at things, was sort of like, okay, when I look at the bulk of everything over a couple of years, what sort of time frame seemed the most indicative? And chatted with our revenue team, and they directionally were like, yeah, if you're in a cycle where most sales take 4 months, a 3-month look back window isn't appropriate, right? Like you want to know what happened at 4, 5, and 6 months. And that's sort of part of that decision making, was just like how long. And then could the one on product led growth be a little different? Sure. But then we'd be using a different language, right? If I was working on a 3-month look back and they were working on a 6-month look back, when I say the word look back, we're both going to be referring to different things. And that's a problem. So,
right. Yeah, no, and the consistency of what a word means or a term means or a sentence means within a company is incredibly important when you're talking to each other. But also, I mean, from Kalicube's perspective, when we're communicating with the AI in terms of educating the AI about who we are, what we do, who we serve, and why we're important, is everybody in the team needs to use the words in exactly the same way. And there's a huge human problem of not sticking to the same definition of different terms for ourselves individually, but also across a team. I mean, me over time, I can change the way I talk about something.
well, for sure. In fact, it happened to be about a week ago. I was chatting with somebody over on the marketing ops side who'd been working. I won't get into the detail. I was just like, nope, you don't need all the details of that. But we were chatting, and what we were looking at was how do you get citations on generative engines? Like, what are we looking at here? I referred to something as an attribute, and they referred to something as an attribute. We both use the exact same word. I'm a technical SEO, so when I'm saying attribute, I mean, does it have a table? Does it have the primary keywords from the prompt in the title? What is the domain rank? What are the entities on the that's what I think of as an attribute. No, they meant, does the content include stuff around GPUs? Does the content include stuff around security and governance? They're referring to content types and directions as attributes. I'm referring to tech. It took us like 20 minutes to figure out we were actually referring to a completely different thing. And I was like trying to I was getting frustrated, not at them, but I'm getting frustrated, and I'm sure they're getting frustrated going, Dave keeps answering the wrong question. Right?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. I was answering the right question for me. And now we started just going technical attributes and content attributes, right? Now we've got a unified understanding because we're going to measure them in similar ways. So we're still calling them both attributes, but we're just splitting it. So that common language is incredibly important. And defining that. So understanding how your sales team and what they're referring to is really, really important as well.
Right. And bringing this kind of back, just for one last question on this topic, is I'm using an approach, funnel query pathway, where I identify the cohort intent and identify the ideal question at the bottom of the funnel, and then the questions that would naturally lead to that ideal question with my brand name in at the bottom of the funnel for that cohort intent, and then the top of the funnel query that represents the awareness stage. So it flows down. So it's always by cohort intent. Now I'm thinking, depending on the cohort intent, the look back window is going to be different or could potentially be different.
Yeah. And that's exactly where you can get into problems. I shouldn't say you do get into problems. You can get into problems. And it depends. I have the very significant luxury that other people may not have in the audience today. And that is, I have incredibly talented data science and marketing ops teams that I get to work with. So in that scenario, I would go, great, we've got this cohort of people, right? Like we understand who they are because they sit in Salesforce and they look a lot like this. And we have their user ID there and we have their user ID on our site. And we're just going to stitch this together and go, okay, now we're going to filter this down just to this cohort.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, we just want our the targeted accounts. or whatever. Okay, now let's just look at them and just the targeted accounts, but in robotics, right? Like whatever that might, robotics is a hot topic, right? Right now, that's why I keep bringing that one up specifically, or physically. So yeah, but that part is really, really difficult. I love exactly what you're talking about here, and sort of doing that sort of for anybody who just like bypass that in the listening audience, go back in time, listen to what Jason just said, because that's an incredibly useful tactic to do. And
you mean the funnel query pathway? You said, I love, but you couldn't remember what it was called.
The funnel query pathway, like just the idea of starting with the final question and sort of working your way back. And let's just think about query fanouts and what ChatGPT itself is doing, and AI Overviews itself is doing. It's doing kind of what you said for you. So if you've built all the content along that pathway, chances are you're going to show up well in a generative engine as well, because you've done all the work for them. So
brilliant.
I love it so much.
Thank you. That was absolutely perfect, Dave. Thank you, everybody, for watching this one. And we'll see you in the next one with Dave, which is all about agents as your client. I find that stunningly interesting. See you later.
Thanks.